Jeff York, we're here to talk tonight about a masterpiece, a bona fide classic of cinema, a film that until yesterday I had never seen before. But I'm
Mm.
going to stand here on this platform, on this pedestal, and shout from the mountains that Don't Look Now by Nicolas Roeg from 1973 needs to be seen by everybody who loves cinema. Not only is it influential, but if you love horror, if you love thrillers, if you've been watching them for decades and decades, you're going to see a lot of the hallmarks, a lot of the editing techniques that you've probably seen in dozens of other films, but probably not quite like you've seen in this movie, which was very cutting edge, controversial in its day for a rather gratuitous but loving love scene.
Right, right.
But yeah, I don't know why it's taken me so long to watch this movie, but I finally have, and I'm happy to talk about it with you, Jeff York of The Establishing Shot. Welcome, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's great to be here again with you.
Well, you've seen this film before. You've seen it, like, I guess, a couple of times. Once you said before we got rolling about 10 years ago, and then in preparation for the show. Had you seen it before, or how many times have you watched it?
I think I've probably seen it 4 times, if I recall correctly. The first time I saw it was in college, and they used to have revival houses in Chicago when I was going to the American Academy of Art that we share as our alma mater. There was one called the Varsity in Evanston, and then there was one called oh gosh, was it the Uptown? Maybe I forget what it was called, but it was at the Uptown, the Uptown Theater, whatever it became, and they would show revival movies all the time because you didn't have the wasn't quite as plentiful, and you maybe had VHS and stuff like that, but it wasn't quite the industry that it became via Blockbuster and others. And I went to see 2 Nicolas Roeg films. It was that and the one with oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of it now. Is with Simon Garfunkel. I could look it up. I'll have to look it up. Hang on 1 second. But anyway, I saw it there, and I'd heard about it. I heard it was this really kind of weird, strange dissertation on grief. And indeed it was, but it was also this incredible horror movie too, because it's, and this is what I mentioned right before the show when I watched it just a week or so ago to refamiliarize myself with it. It's scary from the moment it starts. It's cryptic, it's creepy, it's got all this kind of weird imagery. It's got a lot of, just tons of symbolism. The crashing glass and that one color of red, and it's not a nice scarlet red like you've got here on our nameplates. No, it's the blood red of the Hammer films, that they always had that represented blood in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Let alone water and falling and premonitions, but we'll talk all about that. But I was kind of blown away by it. And yet it's also this very sad, mournful movie too, about these 2 adults trying to reconnect after their child has drowned. And I will say this, when I saw it then, and when I saw it just a couple of weeks ago, I think you could almost release that now, other than, of course, some of the cinematography has a little bit of a flatter look to it because it was the early 70s. And you can tell that there's certain things about it that are very period. But the cutting, the editing, the way it's shot, all the locations, the tracking shots, the running behind the actors running around all over Venice. My God, it looks as contemporary as anything today. And it's one of those films like The Godfather and some of the other things you see in the 70s. You go like, how was that film received then? Because that film would look ballsy and kind of break through today. Like they're just really being bold and daring, and it's shot so well. And the score by Pino Donaggio, oh my God, and then that big sort of romantic song at the end, the most romantic piece in the whole film, and yet it's not a very romantic moment. It's an incredible movie, and I think you're right. It really does deserve that reputation of being a classic, and one that everybody should see. And as much as they talk about horror today in Blumhouse, and everybody seems to release a horror movie every other weekend, this is one they should revisit. And frankly, this is one they should be making more movies like this. I think this is very strong characters. It's a very basic premise of grief, and how do you get out of that, and what do you want to believe, and what don't you, believe, and where does your hope go? It's riveting.
Yeah, and it strikes me it's one of those great movies that you got a lot of in the 70s, which were horror movies about adults going
Yes.
through things, especially adults going through things with children. I mean,
Mm,
it's like
so
children's
true.
horror is an entire genre. I mean, you think of things like The Exorcist and The Omen, we think, oh, it's a creepy kid movie, but it really is about what the parents are going through.
That's right.
Um, and they tend to be older parents, like we see in here. Donald Sutherland, I think, was 38 when he made this, and
Hmm.
I'm not sure how old Julie Christie was, but it's not like these are 22-year-olds acting like they're in high school or 25-year-olds acting like they're 22. These
Right.
are adults who've got world experience. These John and Laura Baxter, these are our two protagonists, and they're educated people. They're scholars. We first meet them on this sort of like idyllic estate. It's a foggy, sprawling woods location. There's a fireplace going. They're kind of hanging out doing their scholarly work. He's putting together slides for a big church restoration he's getting ready to embark
Hmm.
on in Venice. And I can't remember what she's doing, but it's something
But that's a
reads from
nice
the
house. They
book.
they live a good lifestyle. They're doing well.
Right, but they've got these two kids, Johnny and Christine, who are just kind of running around the backwoods property, playing, being
Right.
kids. And Laura or Christine has this bright red kind of rain slicker on, and she drowns. And
Hmm.
right before, or I guess as that's happening, John, the dad, is inside, working with his slides, and he has this premonition that he has to run outside
Yep,
because
that's
something's
right.
wrong, and he discovers that his daughter has fallen into this pond, and he jumps in to save her, and he emerges in slow motion. You have these powerful, like downward violins and this slow motion scream, and cut to some time later. They're both the adults are living in Venice. They're picking up the pieces of their lives. He's working on this church site to do the restoration, and it's weird because we know in the beginning of the film that they have two children, but John Jr., little Johnny, isn't mentioned until the movie is almost over. You almost forget that they only had
Hmm.
one kid,
Hmm.
and that, along with some of the weird things they do with time, adds to this level of
Hmm.
surrealism. So by the time you figure out what the mystery of this movie is at the
Right.
very end, it's almost
Right.
like The Sixth Sense in more ways than one. And
Hmm.
we're going to get into spoiler territory, folks. So
Super
turn back
fast.
now.
We've already
Right.
kind of ventured there, but
Right.
stay
Well,
with us because it
yes.
only makes it better.
Yes, if you haven't seen this movie, I would recommend pausing this, watching it right away. It's here, shameless plug. It's on a 4K disc by Criterion, which came out at the end of last year, and you can also find it other places streaming. But this really is it got some great extras on it. But if you have seen it, stick around. If you haven't, you don't want to really spoil this. I'm not going to bother putting up the spoiler banner because whatever. Just listen to us. But by the time you figure out what's really going on at the very end, it causes you to reevaluate the entire rest of the film, and you flash back to all the visual motifs. It's very much Sixth Sense, Usual Suspects, those great kind of contemporary thrillers that you
Mhm,
think, oh my God, this is so amazing. Nicolas Roeg was doing this 20, 30 years before these other
mhm,
films that are more
mhm,
popular and in the zeitgeist. And
mhm.
you just wonder, why isn't this more widely appreciated or known?
It's a very good question. I know that the film was very well received critically at the time, but it was not. I don't think it was a big hit, but I think it was quickly establishing a cult status with it, and maybe it's because it's a very dark film. I don't think there's much um, sort of lightness or happiness, whatever you want to call it, on on the screen. But then again, there were more and more movies like this in the '70s than there were probably movies with happy endings. I mean, the '70s was known for dark material, darker themes, adult themes, and definitely downer of endings. Um, but it's so well done. I think it maybe discombobulated people a little bit too much then because it is, as to your point, it's unusually edited. You're jumping around in time. I mean, just to go from the daughter drowning to suddenly now they're in Venice and they're having lunch together and they look clean and happy, or at least they're pretending to be happy, sort of with their smiling, figuring out what they're going to have for lunch. And the worst that it happens to them is the wind is coming in from it's cold in the restaurant, so Donald Sutherland gets up to close the window. John, I should call him. But it sets up their meeting with these two sisters who are going to play a big part in the movie and in their lives. But I think some of those kind of things, and like even that love scene that you're talking about, where Yeah, two A-listers were doing nudity, and it wasn't too explicit by what we think of by today's standards, but at the time it was fairly explicit, and they looked like they were actually making love. I mean, there was a lot of specific scenes of where he was kissing her and where she was touching him, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what makes that scene so extraordinary, more than even that, which maybe was a little bit daring at the time to see two big stars doing that, was the fact that it's intercut with them getting dressed for dinner afterwards, and it's sort of like a return to normalcy or a return to intimacy, which they established later on that they hadn't really been in that way for a long time, because she was very depressed about the death and not really gotten over it, and he was able to sort of consume himself with the restoration of the church as work to get away from it, but she was there with him and still kind of in this glum setting. But then these two women, one who is blind but has second sight, sees all kinds of stuff, and she sees the daughter still alive and sitting and happy and laughing between them, and it sort of revives the Mrs. Baxter, and suddenly she's interested in making love again and doing things and sort of joining the human race. So that's about the happiest it gets in the film right there too. And yet I love the fact that that love scene is cut with them sort of dressing to go to dinner, almost like saying this is all part of normalcy that's returned, albeit deceptively. But I think that's kind of what's, to me, playing in that scene more than anything is like, this is part of their lives. This is who they were before, doing these kind of things where, you're making love to your spouse and you're getting dressed for dinner and you're going out and you're enjoying each other's company, but they hadn't been there for a while because of the death of the daughter.
Right, and the choices between the two of them, these intercuttings you mentioned, Laura, after she meets these sisters,
Right.
Heather, who is the blind psychic, and Wendy, who is sort of her, I get the feeling, kind of the older sister taking care of her.
That's
I
right.
mean,
That's right.
these, when I say sisters, these aren't kids. These are like considerably
Probably in their
older,
late
late,
50s, I would think. Yeah.
right. Um, they seem to kind of cast a spell on her with this news that at least one of them can see the daughter and the daughter's happy and
Yes.
everything, and as you mentioned, that kind of
Mhm.
relights a spark in her. But during that sex scene, I'm sorry to harp on this, folks, but it
No.
is kind of key to the characters. It's explicit, but it is also very tender and natural. It's not
That's
like
right.
sex scenes that we see today where it's like, oh, we're gonna see some people naked. You really get the feeling these people are reaching out and connecting with each
Mhm.
other, and
Mhm.
it's kind of shocking in the ways that the rest of the film is shocking in other kind of avenues of genre. But, when we're cutting to her, she's getting dressed, she seems kind of distracted, but kind of carefree and kind of happy. And then he is, especially after that scene is over, and he just kind of goes and he plops down on the couch, and
Mhm.
he's very distant and he's troubled. And we really
Mhm.
notice that John, throughout the film, is bothered because he doesn't want to believe any of this psychic mumbo jumbo, but we clearly see that he has that psychic twinkle, as I think
Mhm.
was the expression in The Stand.
Yes.
Um, but it's because we get the feeling he keeps denying something, and it
Mhm.
adds to this mystery of, is there something sinister going on with him, or is he just really conflicted? And what is he really conflicted about? We come to find out later that at the same time all this is happening, there's a serial killer running around Venice, and they're pulling up bodies from the canal, and there's all this kind of panic. There are signs that are up that we keep cutting to in the background saying
Mhm.
Venice in peril.
Yep.
Once you leave the film and you look back on it, a lot, especially by probably today's standards, which may be why folks might see it as being a bit easier, too cheesy. You see all the hallmarks, all the signs that are there, and it seems a bit too on the nose. But in the moment, it's just this terrific mystery of what does it all mean. And for me personally, when we find out what it means, you mentioned this is a very sad film. I don't think it's sad, and some of my other colleagues that I'll talk about, we talk about, is this a giallo film or not, which we'll get to that. They had said that this is one of the most depressing things that they'd seen, and prepare to to need some, yeah, and some uppers afterwards. I felt a tremendous sense of release and relief, partly because I'd watched a filmic masterpiece, but also because I felt that in the end there is a sort of tranquility,
Yes.
even amongst that flash of horror that ultimately
Mhm.
brings John to his fate. When
Mhm.
he is dying horribly as he does, he's flashing back to all these moments in the
Yes.
movie. His brain is finally piecing it together.
Yep.
And I feel like he's gotten the answers that we've watched him struggle
Hmm.
to find within himself and this crazy world for the
Hmm.
last 2 hours. And it's like, that's got to feel great, even as you're hemorrhaging your artery.
Well, the interesting thing that you just said, and I don't want to say that it's sort of mournful in the way that like Ordinary People was, I think, a very mournful dissertation itself on grief, which is interesting that that's Sutherland too. But in that movie, it's how the family is dealing with the fallout from the death of their most popular son or brother. And here, they're still, no matter what they're doing on screen, it is about them during the period after the daughter is drowned, which I think would arguably be qualified as the grieving period. And people grieve in different ways. And I think that one of the ways that John grieves here is by not only burying himself in work, but I think being in denial about stuff and maybe almost wanting Laura to snap out of it quicker. He's a little curt and a little tense during it. But I also think his great sort of flaw, I don't know if you'd say sin, but I think his great flaw is that he is around all these sort of moments that are premonitions and supernatural, and particularly with the sisters and what they are seeing, and they see him in danger and they tell him to be careful. And you see the signs literally and figuratively everywhere, including Venice is in peril. And so are you, John. Do we need to put that one up on the wall for you? Yes, we do. And in some respects, Nicolas Roeg does exactly that. That accident in the church when he's on the scaffolding.
Oh, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
It was so well done. But I mean, there's all these things. And at the very end, as you said, when he's dying, he's finally kind of accepted what he was seeing and realizing how it all fits together. But he's ignored or not seen properly the premonitions. In fact, early on, it's a throwaway line, but I remember reading an interview with Nicolas Roeg when he was, I forget the last movie he made, but it was during that time that he put in the line that you can't believe everything you see. And see, that's, I think, and John says that, and that's his problem. He doesn't believe what he's seen. He's seen things that are premonitions, but he ignores them or dismisses them. And if he had been maybe paying a little bit closer attention, he might have seen them, particularly the boat going by with the funeral flowers and that on it, which is, to me, that's such a wow when you realize what that is. But he thinks it's just I saw my wife. She's here in Venice. I've got a maybe that's a premonition. Are you not sure that's? He's not really giving into what he could be seeing better if he had opened up his mind.
Well, but I wonder about that, because I'm not saying I disagree with you, but this film takes one of the things I love about it is John as a character doesn't realize he's in a supernatural film. His
I love that. It's like,
well,
do you realize that you're in a scary city with all kinds of scary stuff? This one specific red keeps showing up all over the place. It's even in your scarf. Do you not see this, John?
well, but I mean that's the thing. Like
that
can
sinister detective who was interviewing him should have shared some of that with him.
Well,
I can
we'll
see
talk.
it already. I'm just sitting here for 10 minutes. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, we'll talk about him too, because
Sure.
particularly this movie goes like further and it spirals more and more out of control
Yeah.
and into weird territory as it goes
Yeah.
on. But it strikes me the motifs of the reds and all that stuff. That's for the audience, I think.
Yeah, of course.
I
Of course.
don't think John. It's kind of like, you don't know what your own destiny is until
That's
you look
right.
back over the last 5 years. Like,
Probably
if I
true.
hadn't gone to
Yeah.
that store, then I never would have met this person or taken
Yes.
this turn and gotten
Yes.
this job or gotten run over by a train. I don't know
I
if
was
that has
being a
to do
little
with going to a
facetious
store,
there, but I mean, it is funny. Like, that's one of those things where, like, just the brilliance of symbolism in films, and it shows up in the first couple of, that ball has got that red star in it, her slicker, the blood dropping on the slide. Did you notice that the first slide had the killer in it?
no.
Yes, go back and look. In the very first shot that he's looking at up close, he's got it under the mic. He's literally got it under the magnifying glass. He's looking at it, and you see the red cloaked killer in the right-hand corner. He's in the church.
You know what? I did see that weird shape, and I knew, because I've only
Yeah.
seen the movie once, and
Yeah,
it was
that's
like
okay.
yesterday.
I've got 3 other times on you, so you're doing very well for
Well,
just a
but
one-timer.
well, thank you. But no, what I love is that it's like those other movies that we've mentioned. It's got all these moments that you want to go back and revisit and say, how did I miss that? Or, what more is there to look into here? One thing I noticed was I can't, I want to say it was when Laura was walking through the streets, but it might have been John. But there's a recurring scene with a recurring shot of a wall that has this red streak. It almost looks like rust water or something, but it's
Mhm.
bright red running down the wall in a very narrow, streak, almost like like a waterfall impression,
Right, right.
which mirrors John, when he's dying, his foot kicks out
Yep,
this little
and the
bit of the
blood
stained
comes
glass, and
down.
it
Jesus.
comes trickling down. It's
Yep.
almost exactly the same placement in the frame, the same colors.
Mhm.
It's just brilliant. And I know this is based on a short story, which now I really want to, or a novella, which I really want to read now. I don't know how much of this was from that and how much of this was adapted by Rogue to say, there's some great themes in the book that I want to put, I want to visualize and make into a puzzle for the audience. But yeah, my point is, my earlier point was not only about not recognizing these motifs, but John, who doesn't realize he's in a supernatural thriller, how often do we ignore our own instincts to our own
Yes.
peril? Not even like big things like, oh, I didn't notice that my own funeral procession was passing me by on the canal. But,
Yes.
you're like,
Yes.
maybe, you ever think maybe I should not take that left turn? And then
Right.
you're like, but you take it anyway because you're like, nah, and then you trip over a sidewalk panel. These little moments happen
Mhm.
to us throughout our lives,
For
and
sure.
you ignore them, but it's not because, the script wants you to ignore them. It's just because you don't think anything of it because you feel like you're living in a grounded, non-supernatural world.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that, in the literal sense of the word, that he's necessarily supposed to notice that this sort of, red foreboding color is repeating itself and literally part of the fabric of his very being with his scarf. It's also the color of her boots when Laura comes back. Yeah, and it's the baseball cap on the son at the final scene as well. But it's funny because for the he doesn't really want to see it, and the blind woman, of course, has the real sight. She can sort of see what really is going on and stuff. The Heather character, I think she's played by Hillary Mason is the name of that actress. But and even when she's screaming at him or telling Laura to tell him to avoid this or no, he just kind of got his head a little bit in the sand. It's funny too because I don't know this. I imagine it was, but the title "Don't Look Now" has so much of that kind of that cheeky sort of horror kind of vibe to it, like "Don't look now, but somebody's coming up behind you." Those kind of things, or "I know what you did last summer," or uh, um, "Whatever happened to Baby Jane," or "How awful about Alan," things like that. Um, but it's so funny because he's sort of not looking. He's not seeing what he probably should be seeing, and even at the end, I don't want to jump to the end with him chasing after the red hooded character, but I think the child's laughter and I think some of the things that he's putting into that scene are him maybe buying into some of the wishful thinking of his wife, or maybe the parts of his mind where he doesn't necessarily feel 100% anymore about whether his daughter is dead. And that kind of gets him in trouble because there's clearly signs that this is not the red slicker. It's not his daughter and other things going on. But yeah, it's one of those films that if you're a horror buff and you haven't seen this movie, you're missing one of the essentials.
Yeah, and I don't think we should oversell it in terms of like horror. I agree. If you're a horror fan, you should definitely watch this. But this is not a slasher film. It's not
Not at
a
all.
gore fest.
No,
Um,
there's
there is
very
one.
little. I mean, I don't think there's much going to the very, very end.
Right, and even that is, sort of tastefully done. It's
Yes.
awful, but it's not like there's constant slashing
Yeah.
back and forth or anything.
Right.
Plus, it's intercut with this, like we mentioned, this kind of beautiful montage of flashback where everything is revealed.
Right.
But yeah, it is very much an atmospheric, character piece about these two adults learning to live with loss. I mean, I would say the other contemporary example would probably be like The Others, but that's even from 24 years
But
ago or
that's a very
whatever.
good comparison, I think. And I think it is also where the one of the things I really appreciate about watching it this time, which I think I obviously registered that when I'd seen it before, but it really came through, is like how much the location shooting is a character in this film. I mean, it's so essential to it, and I like that. I just got done watching the first episode of the new True Detective with Jodie Foster, and they shot it in Alaska, and it takes place in Alaska. And it's just incredible when you see a movie shot on its location and not Vancouver or Toronto subbing for New York City or something like that. And here they're really out on the canal and down those corridors. And it just, that city becomes a scary character in the film. It's mysterious anyway, and it's kind of hidden pathways and tight, narrow passageways and such. The water being how you get around the town is already kind of creepy and weird. And of course, where does he go to restore the church? A place covered in water. And where did his daughter drown? In water. So, the water motif is, to your point, maybe a little on the nose, but it's also terribly ironic that that's where they're going to sort of find some escape from it. And they're surrounded by all kinds of things that are not exactly codifying or soothing for sleep, I would think.
Well, it also, the end of the movie, I think it's just ambiguous enough that you could take it as at face value. And we'll just jump ahead to the
Sure.
kind of the spoiler point. Um, John ultimately does pursue a figure who he sees in what he perceives to be the red slicker that his daughter was wearing. He corners her. It turns out it is the serial killer that's been stalking people in Venice. It's this weird little person in a red slicker who has this
Right.
maniacal grin, and she pulls out this giant, knife and slashes him across the throat. He bleeds to death horribly, like kicking and kind of moaning.
That's
And
right
then
on the jugular.
yeah, and he's dying and kind of piecing all this together in his death throes. You could take that literally to say, okay, so he was seeing premonitions of this moment, like and the aftermath, because that
Mhm.
funeral procession, that was his funeral procession. That was
Right.
Laura and the twins, or the
Gondola. Yep.
sisters.
Or the boat.
Or you hear stories about when you die, the brain kind of shuts down, and you can get
Mhm.
this like influx of information. This is like the life flashing before your eyes, but it's not necessarily organized, because
Mhm.
your brain is dying. It could be
Mhm.
stuff kind of jumbled up into a very dreamlike
Sure,
state. So
sure.
how much of this was ever actually real versus his mind making motifs and stories into the form of this movie to rationalize the end of his life?
Yeah, it's a good question. And in fact, I would argue that you can't really take this film at face value because of that line. You can't believe everything you see, or I'm not sure if there's a single really objective shot in here. I think most of it is open to interpretation. I mean, even the son who breaks the glass riding over some old board or something in the very first scenes on his bike is not paying attention to his sister, and that almost seems sinister, but it's like it's happening around him. But does that mean anything to him at the moment other than there's glass in his tire? Probably not. But again, with all of the stuff that starts with Donald Sutherland's character of John having these premonitions, I think it is at least erring on the side of what we are seeing are things that are telling him what is going on. And I think, it's funny, there's a great motif in horror, and I think we've talked about it on your show many times, but the was it not The Other Man, but the something man. Blake Snyder writes about it in his Saving the Cat book. I'm sorry that I'm forgetting key things tonight, but but he says in most horror there is somebody who tells you what's going to happen. A lot of times it's just a odd character that comes in, you know.
Crazy Ralph from Friday the 13th.
Exactly, things like that, or the character who kind of actually tells the answers to you at some point. The Vincent D'Onofrio character, if you will, in Sinister, the movie with Ethan Hawke
Oh
as the
yeah, yeah.
best-selling writer trying to write another serial killer thing, and Vincent D'Onofrio not only is a professor, he calls online to tell him who this character is and what's the mythic lore, but also sort of tells you, here's the stuff, here's the shit.
But
um,
another great horror movie about an adult going through
yes,
the
so true.
crisis of fleeting fame and
And
finding meaning in your work.
missing
Yeah.
the signs as well, I guess, in a
Yeah.
way, be sort of being blinded by his own ambition. But what I love here is the Heather character. Now, she's much bigger of a character in here than normally that person is in these kind of movies, and yet she is there to not only provide this creepy foil to that John gets mad at her and her sister for sort of putting thoughts in Laura's head and making her think things that aren't realistic. At one point, he yells, "Our daughter is dead," and but deep down, I'm not sure he's convinced. But what I love about the Heather character, she's first brought in to sort of do this terrible misconception job, or con job, not a con job, but convince, I guess that's what con is short for. Convince Laura that the daughter is maybe dead. But then as it goes on, she's seen more and more stuff. And at the end, when she's saying to Laura, go out and get him, he's in danger. It's like, she's not the boy who cried wolf. She's been right every damn time, even if it's a little on the nose, as you pointed out. But I think she keeps coming back into it as she may be blind, but she's the one who can see what's going on. And she's the only one who's really sort of got the vision.
Well, and that brings up a bigger question, which is, if she's psychic and she can see that he's in such danger, why? And maybe it's the unclear language of the psychic, and they
Right.
can't necessarily they can't literally interpret the things that they see, because we don't necessarily see what she sees. We just see her have these kinds of episodes and
Right.
make these proclamations. But it's like there's almost an inevitability about this entire movie. Like there was no way that he wasn't going to end up dead at the end of this movie at the hands of this person. Which, maybe the psychic sister is something that he used to make sense of all this, and ignoring the warning signs, because if he can ignore this crackpot psychic lady as a stand-in for him not paying attention to his own intuition or his own psychic vibes, maybe that's
right.
letting himself off the hook. I don't know if she's literal or a figment of his rationalization.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I think she's there in some respects, I think, as a movie motif, which is what Blake Snyder said that kind of character is. I think it's called a half person, maybe. Like it's kind of a half character, because the character is really there to give this very important exposition.
It's Basil exposition from
That's
Austin
right.
Powers. Yeah.
Hello, Austin. That's my mother, Austin. She's a man, baby. That killer is really a strange-looking munchkin, man. I don't know. It's the first job she got since '39. But nonetheless, I think it's funny how John falls into sort of the typical character that often exists in horror, which is another reason I think to recommend it to horror fans and see how it can be done, where it isn't like he's a dunderhead, but he does act, I guess, carelessly and maybe too brazenly at certain points. I mean, I think it's interesting that he's going and running after these things and sort of not paying attention to stuff, and comes very close to getting killed, in some respects. It reminds me of like what they did with the Gregory Peck character in The Omen. It's like all this stuff is going on around you, and yet you're still hesitating to kill that child. He's a child. He doesn't know what's going on. He has no reason to do this. It's like, it doesn't matter. You have to stop the devil, and you didn't. Your friend's head was just lopped off by happenstance from a glassy truck. Come on. But here, I mean, he's running around, and a detective tells him to pull back, and he even points out that he's wrong in getting these women sort of detained and everything. And he's missing the signs. He's, don't look now, John, but that person you think is your kid is maybe the killer. That's the B plot throughout this entire film that you've been ignoring.
And that's why I keep coming back to this idea of he is like the ultimate rational man.
Yes.
Because let's look again at signs that we may have ignored in our own life. If we go up to the pearly gates after it's over, it's like that story, the metaphor of the guy in the rowboat, or no, he's trapped on his roof because there's a flood, and God sends him like someone else coming by in a boat. He sends him like an airplane, all this other stuff, and he goes up to heaven after he dies and drowns, and he's like, why didn't you save me, God? And he's like, I sent you a rowboat, an airplane, a helicopter. We're ignoring these signs because we think there can't be anything more. We would expect big M writ large miracles. But in this presentation, he might be spiraling into madness because there's all this crazy stuff happening, but at no point might he think, well, this is supernatural forces at work. We, the audience, I mean, we can see that. I was convinced that the Wendy and Heather characters were actual witches because
Mm.
of the way not only
Mhm.
do John and Laura start noticing them, like
Mhm.
always walking in
Yeah.
pairs, always
Yeah.
showing up unequivocally when
They're all over the place. Yeah.
right, but towards the end, other people start seeing them.
Mhm.
There's a great shot of when John goes to visit. It wasn't maybe it was the consulate or some official that he has this very weird meeting with, and the guy is sitting there like writing at his desk, and it
Yeah.
turns out he's drawing this creepy face, and he looks out the window. John can't see
And
who he's looking at, but he's looking down the street, and then you just see
they're right there.
Wendy and Heather walk. They're just walking, and
Yep.
it's not like they're standing there looking up at him creepily. They're just like walking, doing their business. They don't
Mhm.
stop and turn or do anything,
Right.
but they
Right.
are there. And I'm just wondering what is going on with these people. At one point, um, when John goes to the police station to help get Heather out, because as you mentioned, he had her wrongfully imprisoned, the female guard, when she's letting them out of the room, the camera hangs back on her and she does this momentary twitch of the mouth where she almost
Mhm.
like goes from a passive kind of a drone like, I'm just doing my night shift job, to like this flash of a grin on her face. And then it goes back to normal. And like, what is happening with this movie? Again, I
Mhm.
don't know if it was just the actress, doing a mouth twitch during
Mhm.
this take and they left it in, or if it's supposed to be, yeah, there's forces at work here, audience, and this is a clue that, as John said, not everything is as it seems.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, I think Rogue is maybe lingering on those kinds of shots to illustrate that exactly your point, or perhaps that um, you can't really be sure that you can trust anybody, or anybody is entirely what you think they may be. To your very point, I remember when I first saw it, I thought the women are evil. They might be witches. They might be some sort of conduit to danger. I even had thoughts of Ruth Gordon, who seems like the just comic relief in Rosemary's Baby until you realize she's not very funny. She's pretty sinister. Um, but then by the end, I'm almost wondering if they're guardian angels because they keep trying to help him. And maybe they're hovering around watching him. Maybe that's just a weird presentation of them, but you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't trust everything that you see. You don't know what to believe. The cop seems like a perfectly nice person until she does that kind of odd reaction. And then it's like, is she weird? The civil servant who he's talking to or whatever, where he's drawing the picture and talking to him, he comes off very sinister in it. And what's that about? I mean, I think it's almost like, who do you trust? But I think ultimately, what at the end of the day, no matter what Rogue's intention were, or 20 ways maybe it could be interpreted, because I think these kind of films have those many interpretations. I think it is to unsettle us and make it all seem tense and scary, which it does very well. Again, the city is a character in it. These characters could be bad or they could just be odd. We don't know. We can't really trust anything we're seeing either. And then maybe how we relate to John is that he kind of glosses over a lot of it too. But he sort of pays the price for it with his life. We pay the price for it by being shocked and scared as horror fans who maybe are missing some of those signs too, even though it says Venice is in trouble, you son of a bitch, pay attention. Do
Well,
you remember that first? But it's funny though because Rogue throws it in there from, like I said, that very first shot of the slide, um, uh, of the killer in the church, and but you're not looking for it then. You don't have any expectation for it then, but it's there, and it's kind of funny once you know that. It's like Hitchcock or somebody one time, maybe it was Truffaut who said when he interviewed Hitchcock, but upon the first viewing of Psycho, you're scared to death and it's a horror movie. The second time you watch it, it almost becomes a comedy because it starts to be funny how it cues you or clues you into what's going on here. Like, well, my mother, sorry I'm late. My mother's, how you say, not herself today. I mean, that's a
Right.
throwaway line. We don't think anything of it the first time we hear it, but after we know what the truth of the story is, that line has great meaning.
Well, and that's why, going back to the slide, and again, I got to look for the killer next time I watch it. But, if there is an argument to be made that this whole movie is the figment of John kind of rationalizing the events leading up to his death,
Mhm,
like there's no reason outside of
mhm.
filmmaker flourish that image should appear in the slide. That's like a weird
Yep.
beyond coincidence. That's an actual, cosmic sign of things to
Right,
come.
right.
But you said something that I love my rule of 3, but so far I only have a rule of 2 for this.
Okay.
Uh, the idea of the guardian angel, the sisters who, these creepy characters that look
Mhm.
sinister and they're up to no good. It reminded me of the movie Pet Cemetery with
Mm.
the Pascal character, the guy who got
Yes.
killed on the bike, and he keeps showing up and he's horrifying to look at. His
Mhm.
half of his head is hanging out and his brain's falling down his shirt.
Right.
But it turns out at the end, he's trying to warn Louis Creed from, trying to protect him. Another character who
Mhm.
is brazen. Louis Creed sees the supernatural and walks right through the door. He has no illusion of it.
Right,
So in that
right.
way, he's different from John. But there are also characters who ignore their instincts in pursuit of something that they think is correct. But the other Pet Cemetery reference I got was in that opening scene where John comes up out of the water, cradling his dead son and screaming in slow motion. That was also when little Gage gets run over by the truck, and you've got
Mhm. That's right.
Lewis screaming. It's weird to look out now because he's got that late '80s hair that's like flopping in slow motion in the wind, but
And by the way,
it still
Donald
holds
Sutherland
up.
wore a wig in this one. That's not his real hair.
What?
Yeah. I think, I forget what he did right before this. It might have been Kelly's Heroes or something, but, I think they wanted him to look different and, kind of attractive and, the '70s kind of way that big hair was, but, he wore my understanding is he wore a wig for this.
That's one hell of a wig because I
It
I
was a
remember
very good wig. At least I
he had
went
similar hair
maybe
in
it wasn't full, maybe some of it was around his maybe those are his real bushy sideburns and stuff, but I read that he wore a wig in this.
because I was thinking of Body Snatchers, which he would do a few years
Yeah,
after
and he
this,
had the
and
same kind of hair then, which maybe that was the same wig. They said, "Why did you cut your hair again? We want you to have normal hair." "Well, do you have that wig from Joe McDowell?" "I have the scarf too." "No, no, we can't do that. We'll let your double wear the scarf." Uh, but,
oh man.
but it's interesting because, I think and then at one point too, the other thing that I think this movie is also about, or at least pushes it into the horror genre, if not begs questions about what kind of past these people had. But there's a number of times that they talk about the Baxters being cursed, and in some respects, it seems like from the get go, I don't know if it's is it restoring, changing the church? Is it the all the things that have gone on with Venice and its water problems, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. I mean, the bishop Barbarigo, the character in this seems like a very kind man, but he's also trying to help him. But again, I think from the get go there is this doom, this cast of doom hanging over them that they don't quite see, even to the point where we're being shown it, and it seems almost obvious after you've seen it once and go back and watch it a few times, like I have. Um, but John is, like you said, he's kind of the typical male. Like I'm going to walk into that dark room. I'm going to pursue this without calling the cops first. It's always the daring hero in these things who gets in more trouble because he acts rashly and doesn't really think like a smart, logical person would say, like, I think I'll wait till the day to go see if the vampire's in his house. No, no. Carl Kolchak had to go in there at night.
He wasn't the day stalker.
That's right. He was the night stalker. He's like, I've got a reputation to live up to.
Um, yeah, I mean, let's talk. The other thing that occurred to me was there's a scene at the end, every the climax, where we see that bishop waking up in bed,
Yep.
and he kind of turns off on the light and turns it back off, and he's very disturbed, and we're not
Yep.
quite sure the connection. It reminded me of the end of Donnie Darko, another movie that plays with
Yep.
time and perception of
Yep.
what is real. And at the end, there's the montage of all the people waking up from the nightmare of this like
Mhm.
reality passing through them, and they're
Right.
all kind of shook. I don't know if they're connected. I don't know if Richard Kelly was thinking of this movie, but I thought of it when I when I saw that
He
moment.
may have. I mean, I think this film has probably influenced a lot of movies. I mean, I'm sure if you go into certain films, you can say, "Oh, they borrowed that from Hitchcock. They borrowed that from Nicolas Roeg. They borrowed that from the Hammer films or whatever." And I think too, the Bishop, by being around all of that and being within this world where there's an elevation of accepting supernatural things and miracles or life after death, et cetera, et cetera. He's been touched by it too, but I think he's also felt the effects of being around this sort of sense of doom or danger or premonition or whatever. So, I think it's showing that he's kind of connected in a way as well. I also wonder too, is that why the red is there? Not only for us as the viewer to say, oh, red is either the color of love or the sense of foreboding and blood and danger. I think it's on the danger side for this film. But are some of the things of the premonitions about all of us maybe not paying attention to things or all being open to it just by brushing up against it, by being sort of within the vicinity of it. Do we get colored with it a little bit? Um, and even like, Laura wearing the red boots, is that something that she doesn't realize is kind of part of her connection to all of this, including the big death at the end with the killer being in that same color red cloak. Maybe it's all just saying it. Once you sort of touch that world, it can sort of spread like a virus. But it's all interesting questions, I think, that they raise about what we know, what we can see, what's natural, what's supernatural.
Well,
And we're
it does kind of touch on this idea of the collective unconscious,
right.
to exactly what you're saying. It reminds me, apropos of nothing, but this happens with my family every once in a while. It happened today, in fact, where we'll all come out for breakfast and realize we all dressed in the same color, like the same color
Oh,
scheme,
wow, that's
you know,
interesting.
all differently, but we're all wearing like, but eerily, not just like, oh, we're wearing red sweaters, but we're wearing red sweaters with a touch of gray, like gray sleeves. And it's like,
Oh,
what
wow.
the hell? um, but with the Bishop character, we see his interactions with John, he's always kind of wary and concerned, and like he senses there's something wrong, as if
Mhm,
perhaps if John has a tingle that he is ignoring, perhaps this Bishop character, maybe it's his connection to God or just the way, whatever, almost
mhm,
has like a lesser version of that where he can't quite put his finger on it, but like something unsettling here. I don't quite know what's going on, but I don't like it. We do
mhm.
need to talk about, it's rare that I hate the term jaw dropping because it's a cliche, but honestly, the scene in the church where John goes to get up on this ladder, this scaffolding to match these tiles that they got in for the restoration, and a giant beam falls in. It doesn't fall in slow motion exactly, but we see it happening, and it's like that slow motion car wreck effect where you see something happening, but it's just quick enough that you can't do anything about it, but you want to. We
Mhm,
see this beam fall and penetrate the platform that he's on. He ends up dangling like 100 feet in the air in this
mhm.
cathedral. There's workers all around him. Some are parallel to him up in the rafters, some are down the floor, but he's hanging on there. And it looks like Donald Sutherland is actually
It
doing
does.
this stunt
Yeah.
for, I swear, 3 minutes of screen time, and it's absolutely harrowing. When he falls and catches that platform, my mouth fell open. I
Oh,
was like,
yeah.
"What?" I can only imagine seeing this on the big screen.
Yeah, it is. It's a shocking, and it plays well today. I mean, it's really a great stunt, and the way it builds, and it goes on for a while, and it seems very vicious and violent. I mean, the sound design there and the crash of the glass, and these things are heavy, and it's so high, and then you're also wondering, like, why is that happening? What is this? They don't want to have the church restored? Is it the devil? Is it uh, fate saying leave things that are dilapidated alone because there's a reason for that, and it's the whole reason for Venice as a tourist attraction. I don't know. But it's terrifying, and it's a great scene. And the fact that we know that this is sort of part of these conjurings or visions that are being had by Heather is makes it all the more palpable. And you wonder, is he going to die this early in the film? But it's probably about what 2/3 the way through. But he's had a couple of near misses and stuff like that. I also think it's interesting the very first scene and the way Roeg shoots it is he's underwater a considerable amount of time before he comes out with his daughter. It's not like it's done quick. He's not cutting to save time there. I mean, he is looking and then he goes down and then it's a while before he comes out. So, I think there's many times where you're wondering exactly what the fate is of John. He seems to be getting very close to danger at all times, even when he's in the water there. Now, grant you, he's probably going to be able to be fine and get out of there, but it's treacherous waters and he can't see her and he's diving underneath it to look for her and he's caked in mud. So he's hit the bottom and thrashed around down there. And it's like, he's already a little bit on the edge of between life and death just doing that, let alone a number of other times when he's doing stuff. How about the fact that he foolishly locks that gate at the end too, so they can't get to him? And there's that one scene where Laura's like holding her arms out, trying to get through and she can't. It's like, he doesn't even allow help to come because he's locking the gate to try to figure out what's going on. And so there's no escape route.
He's literally sealing his own fate.
There you go. I love it. See, that's it. You say it and it's on the nose, but but see, that also gives it a certain amount of cheekiness, which I think the 70s had, where they were, they're laughing at us a little bit on this one and laughing with us too, while scaring us. But I think that's Roeg having some fun as a filmmaker. You're right. He's literally sealing his own fate. That's nicely done. I didn't actually think about that as that literal turn of phrase, but that's so funny. Wouldn't it be funny if it said that in the script? And with that motion, John seals his own fate. He will realize that in another 2 minutes.
Well, but it makes sense for the story because what precedes that is him chasing this figure like all through these streets and over bridges and through, into these increasingly scary fog enshrouded environs.
Yep.
And you get the feeling like he's got to close the gate behind him because he does not want to lose her. She's very elusive, this character. Yep. But what struck me here is a reference to another horror movie that came out in 1988, which was Hellbound Hellraiser 2. There is a scene where Kirsty is running through the labyrinth of hell. And it's not hell like everything's on fire. It's a very cold stone labyrinthine place, and it's very dark. And running through these corridors with these arches and bridges, but there's no score. It's just the sound of the clack, 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 clacking of the shoes on the pavement. You could line that up with Don't Look Now and that disorienting kind of feeling. And in that movie, the camera eventually twirls around into darkness and the Cenobites are revealed. In this, there's almost that same feeling, but it's not as obvious as, literally twirling around. We're getting disoriented because we just see all these same structures and we're just running around in circles ourselves.
You're exactly right. Exactly right. And there's other references too, I'm sure, that influenced filmmakers. Like when I watched it a little while ago, I'd forgotten that when he discovers the, whatever you would call it, elfin serial killer, she's kind of in the corner, like with her back to him. What the hell is she doing there? And that reminded me of the really only great horrible, scary shot in the Blair Witch Project.
Yes.
Which is the last shot of that movie. It's like, what's that character doing in the corner there? That's just creepy as fuck. But so is this. This was creepy as fuck too. And then she turns around and reveals herself and you realize, okay, it's not a kid. And then, but like, was the laughter of the kid? See, I think that's John thinking that's his daughter laughing, as opposed to the real laughter of that sinister killer. But
and maybe that is there it is. That's my third Pet Cemetery connection. I don't know when King wrote that, but I feel it was after he saw this movie and did a lot of cocaine. Because what do you have as the climax of that movie? You've got a grieving father pursuing what he thinks is his resurrected dead child,
right.
But it turns out that child has been, or the image of that child has been taken over, corrupted by a much older, sinister, murderous presence.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, it's And he's missing a lot. Like there's a scene where those spots are back on his thigh that his wife calls out to him when they're showering and stuff like that, and he doesn't see that. So I mean, little throwaways where he's not seeing things, or maybe this is a resurrection kind of thing with the. But I also think there's a little bit of a cautionary tale, as there is in most good horror. Is, when you sort of play in these fields, you tend to get burned a little bit. I'm not sure they're saying we can't ask questions about the other world or layers of existence and stuff, but somehow when mere mortals brush up against these things, they tend to not be uh, unscathed. And it seems like he's missing a lot, but maybe he shouldn't be running down those canals, let alone doing any of this kind of stuff that is getting him into trouble.
Yeah, and that's preceded by, I think it's when he was walking with, it was when he was escorting, I think it was Heather, the blind sister, down the steps of the canal, and she was talking
Mhm.
about how the canals feel safe at night because the sound travels and you can hear people coming up on you.
Right,
And
right.
a few minutes later, he's running, into this dark city, and it's the least safe thing that he can do. And it's also a very abandoned city. I mean, people seem to be asleep. Maybe it's just a
Mhm.
part of town where people don't go out at night for good reason, but possibly because there's a serial killer about.
Right, right.
The serial killer thing, aside from a couple, and again, I just watched this the one time, they dragged the body out of the canal. That's a big production. At first, I thought that was Laura because she had just
And
left.
she's intended to look like that. I mean, she's got the same color hair, about the same length. It's even a little curly, even though she's been in the drink
Yeah.
for a while. But yeah, it's definitely see, it's all these kind of well, I don't want to say doppelgangers, but I think there's things that mirror other things in it, including that body mirrors the Julie Christie character.
There's one thing before I get to my last topic I want to talk about here, involving time. I want to see if you, as someone who's seen this movie a number of times, if this bothered you at all. One of the kind of the inciting incidents of the when this movie really kicks into gear is Laura and John are in bed together. It looks like it's the middle of the night and the phone rings, and it's the school. Little Johnny's is when we remember that. Oh yeah, they had a second kid.
Right,
Little
right.
Johnny's like at boarding school in London, and there's been some kind of an accident,
Accident, right.
right? And so Laura has to go hop on a plane to go be with him while John stays behind.
Hmm.
But it's the middle of the night, and it's just strange because it seemed like it was some kind of a school accident, which would have happened, I would imagine, during the day. So I'm like, okay, is he in school like back in the States or something? But no, he's in London.
Yeah,
There's
which would
only
be the same
there's
time
only
zone,
yeah,
almost the same time zone.
there's an hour difference
Yeah,
between them.
right.
And then later on when they're talking about Laura coming back, which is
Mm.
another Pet Cemetery connection. Oh my God, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm catching the flight back, but the dad
Mhm.
is gonna go off and do this weird stuff involving the dead
Mhm.
kid. Um, she's like, yeah, I'll be in at 11 o'clock. I'm like, okay, maybe, but it still sounds like they're a world away when they're not that far apart, really. But yeah, again, I don't know if this is
No, those
an
are good
error
points.
or
I
if
mean,
it's an actual playing with time again.
yeah, I mean, and you wonder too, like if they're only an hour ahead, you think they would call during the day, but maybe for some reason she calls at night for whatever reason after. But you're right; those are good questions, and they might be mistakes. There's always mistakes that are there in film when you watch them. Um, if they don't highlight them in the bloopers on the DVD, you can find them on your own if you got a good eye. Again, how much are you seeing? Are you paying attention? But I think there's so many interesting themes going on here, and sort of motifs: the water, the broken glass, things falling and crashing. Obviously the sort of echoing or the duplicative images, and are these people demons? Are they guardian angels? Are they friend or foe? You don't know. Why is everybody weird? Why is everybody so sinister? I think it's all to really kind of make you realize that John is still, even with all this kind of stuff around him, a little bit pigheaded and sort of stuck in his own world and missing stuff and coming very close to danger, very close to things that at least he should be asking better questions about, and maybe asking too rash. Um, I always wonder too, like when you play in that world, whether it's inviting a vampire in or going into the haunted house or looking up things online that you shouldn't be, or looking at scary home movies like Ethan Hawke's character in Sinister. I always think there is this stay out kind of thing. But of course, we as an audience want that hero to go in there and not stay out, because otherwise we want to have a movie and we're voyeurs ourselves and we want to see what happens. But it's always interesting to me. You kind of play with fire, you get burned is one of the earliest lessons you learn as a child. And yet here we are, even though it's a very dull love story, and this person isn't really taking any of those very salient lessons that we learn very early in our lives to heart, because he puts himself in danger a lot through this. And the one thing I think is interesting at the very end is it finally catches up with him. Like, you wonder how many near misses he's had already, like, yeah, he's even from the get-go, like, he's diving into the water. Now, I'm not saying he would necessarily drown, but he could have had a heart attack there or whatever. But I mean, it's a dangerous setting. It's not just played for the tears. It's played for like a little bit of the mystery, and even him, he's struggling to get her out of the thing. Like, he's having trouble carrying her, and all this kind of stuff. And his wife crashes, falls over on the table at lunch, and suddenly that's a disaster and violent too. So, but it's interesting when I love the sort of sense of touching God, whether it's by restoring the Vatican or adopting a child from people after your child has died, that, you're maybe inviting danger in and the devil a little bit. I'm not saying that the devil's in this film per se, but I think he's dancing with him a little bit by being so careless.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. Again, I gotta revisit this at some point to pick up on. I feel like I've gotten a lot out of it, but I also feel like there's volumes to be written and talked about, what I may have missed. Yeah, so one of the and we talked about this before we jumped on. I was planning to talk about this with the Accademia Giallo crew, because it's on our list of, I can't remember who came up with this list, but we got one somehow of like all the Giallo movies or all the ones we're worth talking about, and this came up on it. And I was like, hey, we got the Criterion disc and we've got this name on the list. Why not? And I took it to them and they said, it's not really a Giallo film. I don't know what you want to talk about. I think also they said, you're also going to be really depressed after you watch this. So we kind of didn't. And so, Jeff, you were good enough to talk to me about it. And I'm glad we had this conversation. Really glad I got to see the film. But watching it, I'm puzzled because I see this as a Giallo film. Now, granted, it doesn't have a killer, wearing black gloves and stalking people with stiletto, but it's got the Italian setting, which, side note, you ever been to the Venetian Casino in Las Vegas?
Yes. I stayed in the Venetian Hotel. I stayed at for the soft opening. I was out there for a convention for advertising. I had to give a lecture about children's advertising, and they decided to have it at the Venetian in Las Vegas. So I was literally there the first week it was open, the soft opening, which I now know that term after Ocean's 13 with Willie Bank in his soft opening. But I'm going to get my 5 stars, my diamonds.
Well, I've been there
Al
a couple
Pacino,
of times.
for those of you paying attention and keeping up with the scorecard.
Oh, yeah.
You know it. I just want to make sure viewers are with us.
Thank you. But no, I've been there a couple of times, and I love it because they do try and recreate that. They have actual canals, and you can get on gondolas and ride around this casino. But I thought, how fun would it be to do cosplay, dress up as Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland, and get someone to dress up in the red slicker, and just like almost like the flash mob thing. Don't tell anyone what you're doing, but just like chase each other around the Venetian.
That would be wonderful. I love that. That's a great idea. Yeah, I could. Yeah, it's funny because you're right. When I was there, I thought of that too. It's one of those things that it's so Italian, and with the church and everybody's speaking Italian in this, and there's oftentimes that they don't have any subtitles or translation. I mean, Donald Sutherland's character of John Baxter speaks very good Italian in it, and but yeah, I think your friends made a mistake, but their mistake, my golden opportunity to get to talk to you about it.
Well, and that's the thing. I'm gonna bring this up with them just to ask at some point soon, because I'm puzzled. It's got the Italian setting. It's got a killer on the loose. It's not the driving point, but it is an element. It does have a mystery that needs to be solved. These adults trying to solve it. It does have some pretty shocking violence, not in the way that we might expect from other gialli, but I consider
Mhm.
that church scene to be shocking violence. One thing we didn't talk about is at one point there's a construction worker who's trying to reach out with a beam
Oh,
that
yeah.
John can grab onto,
Yes.
but it's pointed at the camera as the camera is swinging. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh
Mhm.
my God, he's going to get impaled on that beam that he's
Mhm.
supposed to be reaching out to.
Well, and there's so much. The one thing I would think that I love about this movie is I think there's danger in every scene. I mean, I
Mm.
think there's a sense of uneasiness, not only because of the supernatural qualities, and you're wondering if, maybe somehow the daughter has been reincarnated or whatever, but every time he's working, I think he's sort of in danger in a way. That big head that he's moving into the one place on
Oh
the
yeah.
like the buttress or whatever, and at times it almost looks like it's a mirror, like it has a slight resemblance to him. And again, there's this sort of doubling or the mirror imagery, and yet it's this big heavy thing, and he's again way up. And he's trying to put this into place, and it's too heavy, and he's struggling with it. And see, there's another he could have fallen right there, and they're teasing us like, is this going to be the scene where he falls? No, nope, that's coming later, and wait till you see it. But that whole movie is kind of on on the edge like that.
Yeah, very much so. I still don't. I got dizzy when I was watching that scene with the big head. Thanks for bringing
Oh
it
yeah.
up. But the most important reason that I maintain that Don't Look Now is a bona fide giallo film is because there are a couple of shots involving J&B Scotch, which is a hallmark of the giallo genre. And in fact, in one scene, John is
I did
drinking.
not realize that was such a hallmark, but that's
Oh,
wonderful.
oh yes. Actually, hold on. Let me see if you can see it. You can see it right behind me there.
Oh my
That's
goodness,
J&B
there it
Scotch.
is. Watch out for the scaffolding around you. Those shelves look unstable, Ian.
I've got them pretty weighted down by
I
my
know.
J&B Scotch. But no, at one scene in the when John's at a cafe,
Yeah, I'm
you see
drinking a
these
lot.
three. Yeah, but there's these three bottles, these three mini bottles with the telltale red
Right.
cap and yellow
Yes.
label. Plus, I think there's another shot. But yes, that's what makes it officially giallo. Um, but
Love it.
but
There's
Jeff,
always room for Jello.
there's always room for giallo. There
Yes,
you go. Wow, that's a t-shirt. Someone should make that shirt.
I think so. It sounds like
Um,
a friend Mark would do a T-shirt like that.
yeah, a spoiler room special. I'll have to get him on that. But anyway, Jeff, thank you very much for hanging out and talking about this incredible movie. I'm glad we got to talk about it. And where can people find your stuff? I mean, what are you up to? I know the answer, of course, but for those who might
For
not.
those who are initiated, well, thank you for asking, Ian. Well, I can always be found on one of your shows, which is always great, and I'd be happy to even be on more of them. That's how much I think of you and your show, and try to listen when I can. And how dare that Pat McDonald get all the '70s movies with you? I want equal time. I'm
Hey,
from that era as well.
what decade is Don't Look Now from, sir?
You're right, '73. Very good. Move over, Pat McDonald. You've been replaced.
No,
I'm
no,
the
no.
double. We're doubling here now too. '70s child. Moving on. Okay. As you can read here, my blog is the establishingshot.org. I have been writing that for over a decade, and member of the Chicago Indie Critics, which, by the way, we have our awards this weekend, but I'm not able to attend it for work. But I also write twice a month for pipelineartists.com. It's a magazine about creativity online, and I do essays on the film business or in entertainment industry, and they're usually accompanied by caricatures, which also accompany the movie reviews that I like, especially, or feel are worthy of having a special illustration rather than just the movie poster as the art. I do caricatures as well, and it's interesting. We talked about this the other day, but there is currently a sort of promotion for the new year being done by one of the groups I belong to, the International Society of Caricature Artists, where each day they assign a celebrity and we have to draw it for 31 days. And I've kept up with it so far. We're on day 18 tomorrow. And I have to draw Reese Witherspoon. Well, I've drawn before, but the question is, how will I draw her this time? But I do some of that kind of stuff. So you can follow me on pipelineartist.com, theestablishingshot.org. I'm on Instagram as Jeff York Caricatures and Jeff York Chicago. The movie stuff is usually on the Jeff York Chicago. The caricatures are just the art, but sometimes they mix. But those are 4 places you can follow me if you so find me interesting enough to follow after this.
Well, yeah, everybody check out Jeff's stuff. He's a tremendous artist, a hell of a film critic, and a great
Thank
friend.
you.
So,
Thank you.
thank you very much, sir, for hanging out. Also, folks, we did talk about Giallo a bit tonight. The Music Box Theater is they're winding now their Giallo January, which they've done for the last couple of years. They're showing all sorts of fun genre films there, and coming up this coming Monday, they're going to be showing Torso, and on Tuesday they're be showing The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, which we've talked about in Accademia Giallo, done by the incomparable, the maestro, Sergio Martino, who will actually be in town doing Q&As after both those events. So definitely check that out. Information will be down below in the description. I'm planning to go to at least one of those screenings. I'm very excited. Yeah, check us back on Sunday, this coming Sunday, where we'll be talking about another Sergio Martino film in honor of that special event, The Case of the Scorpion's Tail. So I'll be live at 2 p.m. CST. I may or may not also be giving a dressing down to my fellow panelists on Accademia Giallo about like missing the gondola on this film, as it were.
Hey, if you want some help with that, invite me to be on that. I'll say, guys, excuse me, let's see your credentials.
Oh, no. You don't want to get into a credential match with these folks. They are
Uh-oh.
they are the professors of Accademia Giallo.
Okay.
But
Okay.
sometimes the professors need a little education from the young upstart students, of which I am the sole class attendee, aside from the audience. But yeah,
That's funny. By the way, Ian, before we go, I'm remiss in not remembering that other Nicolas Roeg film. So I did look it up quickly on my cell phone here. And it was called Bad Timing, A Central Obsession. Not a very good title, but it was back when Art Garfunkel was starring in films. And he's the lead, and he was very good in it. It's another sort of disturbing psychosexual tale. But that was the double bill that I saw, Don't Look Now, the first time with after college or right around college. I think this movie was from 1980. So it would have been right after that. But somehow that came around to either the Varsity or the Uptown for a double bill on Nicolas Roeg one weekend that I happened to see both of those.
did Rogue have a thing for leading men with giant curly hair? I mean, what
He
the hell?
must have. He must have. Well, and I'll tell you this too. I think he married or at least had a long-term love affair with Teresa Russell, who is the leading lady opposite Art Garfunkel in Bad Timing. I think that was his
Wow.
main squeeze for a long time.
Lucky guy.
Yeah, she
Teresa
was one of
Russell.
those underrated actresses. I think she never quite had the career that she probably should have. But
I remember her from the odd film back in in the 80s, growing up. But you're right. Yeah.
and she
Man.
had some chances. Like she was in Black Widow, remember, with Deborah
Mm-hmm.
Winger and some of those kind of 80s horror thrillers.
Not Scarlett Johansson. This is way before that. A different Black Widow.
Yeah, exactly. This was the meaning of it before, if she became a superhero, was a woman who would marry somebody for their money and then somehow kill them.
I think the tagline for that was "She mates and she kills."
Very good. Oh my God, you are very, very learned, sir. I love that.
It was watching forbidden trailers when I was a kid. Like, I want to see that movie. No, it's rated R. Well, I can watch the trailer a billion times. But anyway,
the
Jeff.
trailers are pretty good.
Yes. All right, we're gonna go. Thanks again for hanging out. This has been Don't Look Now, essential viewing from Kicking the Seat. So yeah, check it out. And yeah, if you did watch it after on our advice, let us know in the comments what you think. And also be sure and like and subscribe to this podcast. Follow Jeff. All of his information will be down below. Until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is. Thank you very much. Take care and beware. Venice is in peril.